I'm Sarah Mitchell, 29, sitting in my cramped studio apartment, staring at the rejection letter that would change everything. My family had spent months calling my decision to leave my stable marketing job the stupidest thing you've ever done. Dad's voice still echoed in my head from our last dinner. You're throwing away your future for some pipe dream? But as I held that letter, not a rejection at all, but a contract offer worth more than Dad had ever made in his best year, I realized something profound. The family that had dismissed my dreams, mocked my ambitions, and treated me like their perpetual disappointment had no idea who I really was. They saw failure where I saw possibility, stupidity where I saw courage. What they didn't know was that their doubt had become my fuel. Every condescending comment, every eye roll, every family gathering where they'd introduce me as our Sarah still figuring things out, it all led to this moment. The moment I'd proved them wrong in ways they never saw coming. This is the story of how I transformed their ridicule into my greatest triumph. I stared at the stack of business cards scattered across my desk glossy white rectangles that read Sarah Mitchell, Senior Marketing Associate, Pinnacle Marketing Solutions. Each card represented 3 years of my life, 3 years of playing it safe, 3 years of being exactly who my family wanted me to be. The irony wasn't lost on me. These cards, once symbols of my responsible career choice, now felt like tiny paper prisons. Dad had been so proud when I landed that job fresh, out of college. Marketing is solid, he'd said, beaming at the family barbecue. Good benefits, steady growth potential. You're finally making smart decisions, sweetheart. Smart decisions. The phrase echoed in my mind as I remembered how suffocated I'd felt. In that sterile office, churning out campaigns for products I didn't believe in. But my family saw stability where I saw stagnation. They saw success where I saw surrender. My brother Jake had graduated the same year with his finance degree, immediately landing a position at a prestigious investment firm. The family's golden child, he could do no wrong. Every Sunday dinner became a showcase of his latest achievements, the new client, the promotion, the corner office with a view. Meanwhile, I sat quietly pushing food around my plate, my own modest accomplishments overshadowed by his perpetual spotlight. Sarah's doing well too, Mom would add as an afterthought, her voice carrying that particular tone reserved for consolation prizes. Marketing is such a stable field. Stable, safe, predictable. These words had become my identity, and I'd grown to hate them. But questioning the path felt like betraying the very people who'd raised me, who'd sacrificed to put me through college, who genuinely believed they were guiding me toward happiness. The worst part was the slow erosion of my own dreams. I'd entered college with grand ideas about starting my own business, about consulting with companies to help them solve their biggest challenges. But every conversation with my parents had gradually worn down those ambitions. Entrepreneurship is risky, Dad would say. Why gamble when you can have security? So I'd chosen security. I'd chosen their version of success over my own vision. And for 3 years, I'd convinced myself it was enough. But sitting in my apartment that evening, contract in hand, I realized something profound. The very traits my family had dismissed as impractical, my strategic thinking, my ability to see solutions others missed, my willingness to take calculated risks, these were exactly what had made me successful. The difference was that I'd finally had the courage to bet on myself instead of playing it safe. Those business cards would go in the trash tonight. Tomorrow, I'd start writing a different story. The resignation letter sat on my desk for 3 days before I found the courage to submit it. 2 paragraphs, professionally worded, giving my standard 2 weeks' notice. But those simple sentences represented the biggest risk I'd ever taken. I typed it on a Tuesday morning after another soul-crushing meeting about a campaign for discount toilet paper. My manager, Craig, had spent 45 minutes explaining why our target demographic cared more about softness messaging than environmental impact. I'd sat there nodding at appropriate intervals while something inside me screamed that this wasn't what I was meant to do with my life. That evening, I called my parents to share the news. The conversation still haunted me. You're quitting? Dad's voice had shifted from casual to concerned in seconds. Sarah, honey, you can't just walk away from a good job. Do you have something else lined up? Not exactly, I'd admitted. I'm starting my own consulting business. I've been researching it for months, and I think, you think? Mom's voice joined the conversation, that particular pitch she used when she was trying not to panic. Sarah, you can't make decisions based on what you think. You need security. You need benefits. What if you get sick? What if this doesn't work out? The questions had come like rapid-fire bullets, each one designed to expose the holes in my plan. What about health insurance? What about retirement savings? What about the mortgage on the condo I've been saving for? What about my future? Jake had dropped by their house that night, and somehow the conversation had turned into a family intervention. 3 voices, all saying the same thing in different ways. I was making a mistake. I was being irresponsible. I was throwing away everything I'd worked for. Look, sis, Jake had said, his tone gentle but patronizing. I get it, everyone goes through a quarter-life crisis. But you don't blow up your whole life because you're having a bad day at work. You tough it out. You climb the ladder. You make smart choices. Smart choices. There it was again. This isn't a quarter-life crisis, I protested. This is me finally listening to what I actually want instead of what everyone else thinks I should want. The silence that followed was deafening. When Dad finally spoke, his voice was heavy with disappointment. Sarah, I love you, but this is the stupidest thing you've ever considered. You're 29 years old. You can't afford to make mistakes like this anymore. Real life doesn't care about your dreams. Those words had hit me like a physical blow. Real life doesn't care about your dreams. From the man who'd always told me I could be anything I wanted to be, who'd encouraged me to dream big as a child, who'd once said my creativity was my greatest asset. I'd hung up that night feeling smaller than I had in years. For 48 hours, I'd stared at that resignation letter, wondering if they were right. Maybe I was being stupid. Maybe I was naive. Maybe I should just accept that this was what adult life looked like, trading dreams for stability, passion, for security. But on Thursday morning, watching Craig explain why our toilet paper campaign needed more emotional resonance, I realized something crucial. The only thing stupider than taking a risk on my dreams would be spending the rest of my life wondering what might have been. I submitted the letter 5 minutes later. The fallout was immediate and predictable. My parents called it career suicide. Jake offered to talk sense into me one more time. Mom cried. Dad stopped returning my calls for a week, but for the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe. What my family didn't know was that my resignation wasn't impulsive. It was the culmination of 8 months of meticulous planning. Hidden in the bottom drawer of my desk, beneath old tax returns and college transcripts, lay a notebook filled with my handwritten business plan, pages and pages of market research, competitor analysis, pricing strategies, and financial projections. I'd started writing in that notebook the previous fall, during lunch breaks and quiet evenings when the loneliness of my corporate job became unbearable. Each page represented hours of research, late nights spent learning about business licenses, tax implications, and client acquisition strategies. While my family saw my resignation as reckless abandon, I saw it as the logical next step in a carefully orchestrated plan. The business concept had crystallized during a particularly frustrating project at Pinnacle. We'd been hired by a mid-sized manufacturing company to revamp their marketing strategy, but it quickly became apparent that their real problem wasn't marketing, it was operational inefficiency. Their production costs were through the roof because they never properly analyzed their supply chain. Their employee turnover was devastating because they never invested in management training. Their customer complaints were mounting because they'd never implemented quality control measures. But Craig and the team were only interested in designing prettier brochures and catchier slogans. When I'd suggested addressing the underlying business issues, I'd been told to stay in my lane. That night, I'd gone home and written the first entry in my notebook. What if there was a consulting firm that actually solved problems instead of just making them look prettier? From there, the vision had grown. I'd identified a gap in the market for small to medium businesses that needed strategic guidance but couldn't afford the big consulting firms. Companies that were stuck, struggling with growth, efficiency, or profitability, but didn't know where to turn for help. I could be that bridge, someone with corporate experience who could speak their language and offer practical solutions. I'd spent months researching the consulting industry, learning about different service models, studying successful consultants, and identifying potential client segments. I'd even reached out to a few small business owners under the guise of market research, testing my hypotheses about their pain points and willingness to pay for solutions. The financial projections had been the hardest part. I'd had to be brutally honest about my expenses, my timeline to profitability, and my worst-case scenarios. But even in the most conservative estimates, the numbers showed promise. If I could land just 3 small clients in my first 6 months, I could cover my basic expenses. If I could build a reputation and start getting referrals, the business could scale quickly. I'd also planned for the emotional challenges. I knew my family wouldn't understand. I knew there would be lonely nights and moments of doubt. I knew I'd have to develop thick skin and learn to validate my own choices instead of seeking approval from others. But what I hadn't fully anticipated was how liberating it would feel to finally pursue something that felt authentically mine. Every page in that notebook represented a choice I'd made based on my own vision rather than someone else's expectations. Every late night spent researching competitors or calculating profit margins felt more energizing than any day I'd spent in the corporate office. The notebook also contained something else my family would never understand: a list of the skills and experiences that made me uniquely qualified for this venture. My marketing background had taught me how to understand customer needs and communicate value propositions. My corporate experience had given me insight into the challenges businesses faced from the inside. My natural problem-solving abilities, which my family saw as overthinking, were actually perfect for consulting work. Most importantly, I'd written down my why, the deeper purpose that would sustain me through the inevitable challenges. I wanted to help businesses reach their potential. I wanted to solve meaningful problems. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that bore my name and reflected my values. As I flipped through those pages now, unemployment officially beginning in 2 weeks, I felt a mix of terror and exhilaration. The safety net was gone, but so were the constraints. For the first time in my adult life, my success or failure would be entirely up to me, and that felt like the most empowering thing in the world. The family group chat became my daily dose of reality checking, or what my family called keeping me grounded. Screenshots of our conversations would later serve as evidence of just how relentless their concern had become. "Sarah, I saw a job posting at Miller & Associates that would be perfect for you." Mom texted on a Tuesday morning, 3 weeks into my unemployment. Marketing director position. Great benefits. I could put in a word. Before I could respond, Jake chimed in. "Still time to fix this before it gets worse, sis. The longer you're out of the workforce, the harder it'll be to explain the gap." Dad's message followed immediately. "Your mother's right. Swallow your pride and get back to work. This consulting fantasy isn't going anywhere." Fantasy. The word stung every time one of them used it. The Sunday dinners had become exercises in endurance. What used to be family bonding time had transformed into weekly sessions of unsolicited career counseling. I'd arrive at my parents' house to find printed job listings stacked on the kitchen counter, each one highlighted in yellow marker with notes in Mom's careful handwriting. "Good benefits package," or "close to your apartment," or "just trying to help," she'd say when she saw my expression. "We love you, sweetheart. We don't want to see you struggle." But the help felt like judgment, and the love felt conditional. It was as if my worth as a daughter was directly tied to my employment status and their approval of my choices. Jake's success stories had become more frequent and more pointed. Every dinner brought news of his latest achievement, a promotion, a big bonus, recognition from his partners. But now these updates came with a specific purpose, showing me what I was missing by choosing the wrong path. "Just closed a deal that'll net me a $20,000 bonus," he announced one Sunday, cutting into his steak with satisfaction. Nothing like the security of knowing exactly where your paycheck is coming from every month. The implication was clear. I was flailing while he was thriving. I was taking risks while he was reaping rewards. I was disappointing everyone while he was making them proud. The worst part was the gentle condescension that had crept into every interaction. When I mentioned sending out proposals to potential clients, Dad would nod with the kind of patient smile you'd give a child explaining their imaginary friend. When I talked about market research or competitive analysis, Mom would change the subject to something more practical, like whether I was eating enough vegetables. "Have you considered going back to school?" became Mom's favorite suggestion. "Maybe an MBA? That will give you some structure while you figure out what you really want to do." Structure. Because clearly, what I was doing didn't qualify as structured or legitimate. The family's concern reached its peak during Jake's birthday. Dinner at an upscale restaurant I could no longer afford. While everyone ordered wine and appetizers, I quietly calculated whether I could cover my portion of the bill without touching my rapidly dwindling savings. "So Sarah," Jake's girlfriend Emma asked with genuine curiosity, "how is the business going? Are you getting clients?" Before I could answer, Jake jumped in. "She's still in the planning phase," he said, using air quotes around planning phase. "Lots of research, lots of networking, but nothing concrete yet." "Oh," Emma said, her smile faltering slightly. "Well, I'm sure something will work out." The conversation moved on, but I sat there feeling invisible. My dreams reduced to a failed experiment that everyone was too polite to discuss directly. The drive home that night was the loneliest I'd ever felt. My phone buzzed with the family. Group chat again, Jake sharing photos from dinner. Mom commenting on how nice the restaurant was. Dad mentioning how proud he was of Jake's success. No one mentioned me at all. That night, I turned off notifications for the family chat and made a decision. If I was going to succeed, it would have to be in spite of their doubt, not because of their support. Their criticism had become background noise, a constant drumbeat of negativity that I could either let crush me or use as fuel. I chose fuel. Every dismissive comment, every concerned suggestion that I abandoned my dreams, every family gathering where I felt like a cautionary tale, it all became motivation. They wanted to see me fail so they could say they'd been right all along. But what if they were wrong? What if their limited vision of success was exactly that limited? What if I could prove that sometimes the stupidest decision is actually the smartest one you'll ever make? My first client was a small bakery called Sweet Dreams, owned by Maria Santos, a woman in her 50s who'd been struggling to compete with the chain stores moving into her neighborhood. The invoice I sent her for $500 represented more than just my first payment. It was proof that someone, somewhere, believed my services had value. Maria had found me through a Craigslist ad I posted with trembling fingers, offering business strategy consulting for small enterprises. The ad was carefully worded to sound professional while acknowledging that I was new to independent consulting. When Maria called, I'd been sitting in my pajamas at 2 p.m., having spent the morning applying for backup jobs that I hoped I'd never need. "I don't know much about business consulting," Maria had said in her gentle accent, "but I know I need help. My sales are down 30% this year, and I don't know what to do." Our first meeting was at our bakery at 6 a.m. before opening time. The space smelled like cinnamon and fresh bread, and Maria's passion for her work was evident in every perfectly arranged pastry display. But as she showed me her books, the problem became clear. She was hemorrhaging money on ingredients that weren't moving, her pricing hadn't been adjusted in 3 years, and she had no system for tracking which items were profitable and which were drains on her resources. Over the next 3 weeks, I helped Maria implement inventory management systems, repriced her menu based on actual costs and market research, and developed a simple marketing strategy focused on her unique strengths, authentic recipes from her grandmother, and a commitment to community that the chain stores couldn't match. The $500 fee was a fraction of what established consultants would charge, but for me, it represented validation. Maria's sales increased by 15% in the first month after implementing our changes. More importantly, she hugged me when I delivered my final report and said, "You saved my business." But when I shared this victory with my family, their response was lukewarm at best. $500? Dad had said, not even trying to hide his disappointment. "Sarah, you made more than that in a week at your old job." And that was guaranteed income. "It's a start," I protested. Maria's already referring me to other business owners in her network. "Honey," Mom had added gently, We're proud that you helped someone, but this isn't sustainable. You can't pay rent with $500 projects. They weren't wrong about the money. By month 3 of my consulting venture, my savings account was looking dangerously thin. I'd landed 2 more small clients, a local gym and a family-owned restaurant, but the payments were modest and irregular. Some weeks I made nothing. Other weeks, I barely covered my expenses. The financial stress was crushing. I'd moved to the cheapest apartment I could find, canceled my gym membership, and started buying generic groceries. Every expense became a calculated decision. Coffee with potential clients became water. Uber rides became bus routes. New clothes became whatever was clean in my closet. The hardest part was watching my family's "I told you so" expressions multiply with each passing week. They never said it directly, but the concern in their voices carried an unmistakable undercurrent of vindication. Every family interaction became an opportunity for them to subtly suggest I reconsider my choices. The Miller and Associates position is still open, Mom would mention casually. They said they'd love to interview you. Jake's firm is hiring too, Dad would add. Different department, but the pay is excellent. The pressure was relentless, and there were nights when I seriously considered giving up. When my laptop broke and I couldn't afford to replace it immediately, I spent an entire evening researching job openings. When a client was late paying an invoice and I had to choose between groceries and my phone bill, I drafted a resignation email to my own business, but something always stopped me from hitting send. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was pride. Or maybe it was the voice of Maria Santos saying, "You saved my business." And knowing that I made a real difference in someone's life, the family dinners became increasingly uncomfortable. While Jake shared stories of his latest successes, new car, vacation to Europe, talk of buying a condo, I sat quietly, eating my mother's cooking and trying not to think about the ramen noodles waiting for me at home. "How much longer are you planning to try this?" Dad finally asked one Sunday, his voice gentle but firm. "I mean, at what point do you admit it's not working?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Everyone was looking at me, waiting for an answer I didn't have. Because the truth was, I didn't know how much longer I could survive financially. I didn't know if the next client would come or if my savings would run out first. I didn't know if I was being brave or just foolish. What I did know was that every day I spent building my own business, even when it was terrifying and financially precarious, felt more meaningful than any day I'd spent in that corporate office. The fear was real, but so was the sense of purpose. "I don't know, Dad," I said finally, "but I'm not ready to quit yet." The stack of certificates on my desk told the story of my relentless self-improvement: digital marketing strategy, project management fundamentals, financial analysis for non-financial managers, and advanced business strategy. Each course had cost money I could barely afford, but I knew that investing in my skills was the only way to justify charging clients more than $500. I'd enrolled in online courses during my lowest earning months, often studying until 2 a.m. after, spending my days pitching potential clients or working on existing projects. The financial strain was enormous. Every course fee meant another week of ramen dinners and generic coffee. But I could feel myself becoming more competent, more confident, more valuable. The networking events were the hardest part. Every Tuesday evening, the local Chamber of Commerce hosted mixers at downtown hotels where established business owners mingled over wine and appetizers I couldn't afford. I'd nurse a single drink for 2 hours, collecting business cards and trying to project confidence while wearing the same black blazer to every event. "What's your company's specialty?" successful-looking consultants would ask, and I'd launch into my carefully rehearsed elevator, pitch about helping small businesses optimize their operations and growth strategies. Some listened politely before moving on to more established professionals. Others dismissed me entirely once they realized I was new to the industry, but occasionally, someone would express genuine interest. That's how I met David Chun, who owned a small tech startup struggling with operational inefficiencies. Our conversation at a particularly crowded networking event led to my biggest project yet, a 3-month engagement that would pay me $3,000. David's company was bleeding money because they'd scaled too quickly without proper systems in place. Employees were duplicating work. Projects were falling through cracks, and customer service was suffering because no one knew who was responsible for what. It was exactly the kind of problem I burned to solve during my corporate days, but now I could implement solutions without layers of bureaucracy slowing down the process. Working with David's team was exhilarating. For the first time since leaving Pinnacle, I felt like I was using all of my skills and training. I developed workflow systems, created communication protocols, and helped them implement project management software that transformed their daily operations. Within 6 weeks, their efficiency had improved by 40%, and their customer satisfaction scores were the highest they'd ever been. David was so pleased with the results that he introduced me to 3 other startup founders who needed similar help. Word was spreading, slowly but steadily, that I could deliver real results for growing businesses, but my family remained skeptical. When I excitedly shared news of the $3,000 project, Jake's response was telling, "That's great, Sarah, but how many $3,000 projects do you need to equal what you were making at Pinnacle? And what happens in the months when you don't get any projects at all?" His questions were unfair, but they stung because they reflected my own deepest fears. The inconsistency of income was terrifying. Some months I made nothing. Other months brought windfalls that gave me hope. But there was no predictability, no safety net, no guarantee that the work would continue. The loneliness was harder to quantify, but equally challenging. While my former colleagues at Pinnacle grabbed lunch together and complained about their managers, I spent my days alone in coffee shops, working on proposals or client projects. While Jake networked with his finance colleagues at Company Happy Hours, I attended Chamber of Commerce events where I knew no one and felt like an outsider. There were nights when I questioned everything, when potential clients ghosted me after lengthy proposal processes, when networking events yielded nothing but business cards that went nowhere, when the pressure of a regular income kept me awake, calculating and recalculating my dwindling savings. But there were also moments of pure satisfaction that no corporate job had ever provided. When David's team told me their new systems had eliminated the chaos that had been driving them crazy. When Maria from the bakery called to say her profits were up for the 3rd consecutive month. When a client hugged me after our final meeting and said I'd given them their confidence back. These victories were deeply personal in a way that corporate achievements had never been. Every success belonged entirely to me, my strategy, my implementation, my results. There were no managers taking credit, no corporate policies limiting my creativity, no bureaucracy slowing down solutions that I knew would work. The professional development courses were paying off too. My proposals were becoming more sophisticated, my pricing more strategic, my client conversations more confident. I was learning to position myself not as a desperate freelancer willing to work for any amount, but as a strategic partner who could deliver measurable value. Still, the family. Dinners remained exercises in defending my choices. Every small victory was met with general concern about long-term sustainability. Every setback was evidence that they'd been right all along about the risks of entrepreneurship. "We just want you to be secure," Mom would say, refilling my wine glass with the same worried expression she'd worn since my resignation. 6 months earlier, security. The word that had once comforted me now felt like a cage. Because what I was learning, slowly and painfully, was that the security they value came at the cost of everything I actually cared about: autonomy, creativity, the ability to make a direct impact on the world. I wasn't secure in the traditional sense, but for the first time in my adult life, I was building something that belonged entirely to me. The manila folder labeled Client Testimonials had grown thick over 8 months, filled with emails and handwritten notes that told a story my family never heard. Each piece of feedback represented not just satisfied clients, but proof that I was building something real and valuable. Sarah's strategic insights helped us increase our profit margins by 30% while improving employee satisfaction. I wouldn't hesitate to recommend her services to any growing business. David Chun Tech Flow Solutions. Working with Sarah was the best investment we've made in our company's future. She didn't just give us advice. She helped us implement lasting changes that continue to benefit our operations. Maria Santos, Sweet Dreams Bakery. Sarah's approach is both analytical and practical. She understood our challenges immediately and provided solutions that we could actually execute. Our revenue is up 25% since implementing her recommendations. Marcus Thompson, FitLife Jim, kept these testimonials private, filed away in my desk drawer like secret treasures. Every few weeks, when doubt crept in or family pressure mounted, I'd pull out the folder and remind myself that regardless of what my family thought, my clients valued what I did. The decision to keep my growing success quiet had been strategic. Each family dinner brought new suggestions about returning to real work, and I've learned that sharing my victories only invited more questions about sustainability and long-term planning. It was easier to let them assume I was struggling than to defend every achievement. But the truth was, my business was gaining momentum in ways that surprised even me. Word-of-mouth referrals were becoming my primary source of new clients. David Chun had introduced me to 4 other tech startups. Maria Santos had connected me with a network of Latino business owners who were hungry for strategic guidance. Marcus from the gym had recommended me to 3 other fitness entrepreneurs. My rates had quietly tripled over 6 months. What started as $500 projects had evolved into comprehensive engagements worth $5,000 or more. Clients were willing to pay premium rates because they could see measurable results from my work. I wasn't just another consultant offering generic advice. I was someone who could diagnose specific problems and implement solutions that actually worked. The portfolio I'd assembled would have impressed any corporate recruiter, but I shared it with no one outside my client circle. A restaurant chain that increased efficiency by 40% after implementing my operational systems. A software company that reduced customer churn by 35% following my customer retention strategy. A manufacturing business that cut costs by 20% while improving quality metrics across all product lines. Each success built on the previous one, creating a reputation that spread through professional networks I hadn't even known existed. Business owners talked to other business owners. Entrepreneurs recommended consultants who delivered results. My name was being passed around in conversations I never heard, in emails I never saw, in coffee meetings where my work spoke for itself. Most satisfying part was solving problems that others had deemed unsolvable. A family-owned construction company was hemorrhaging money on projects that consistently ran over budget. 3 previous consultants had suggested complex software solutions and restructuring plans that would have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars to implement. Instead, I spent 2 weeks shadowing their project managers and discovered the real issue. Their estimating process hadn't been updated in 15 years, and they were systematically underbidding on jobs that required specialized skills. We fixed their pricing model, implemented a simple tracking system, and established protocols for identifying high-risk projects before they became financial disasters. Their profit margins improved by 45% within 3 months. The father who owned the company, a man in his 60s who'd been building houses for 40 years, shook my hand with tears in his eyes. "You saved our family business," he said. We were 6 months away from bankruptcy. Moments like that made every family dinner worth enduring. While Jake talked about closing deals that made rich people richer, I was helping business owners keep their doors open, their employees paid, their dreams alive. The impact was tangible and immediate in ways that corporate work had never been. My confidence was growing with each successful project. I'd learned to trust my instincts, to push back on clients when necessary, to price my services based on value rather than desperation. The scared, uncertain woman who'd left Pinnacle 8 months earlier was evolving into someone who could walk into any business, meeting and command respect, but none of this translated to family gatherings. To them, I was still the daughter who'd made a questionable career decision and was probably struggling to make ends meet. They saw the cheap apartment and generic groceries, not knowing that I was reinvesting every dollar into building something bigger than they could imagine. The hardest part was watching their concern, knowing it came from love, but feeling the weight of their low expectations. When I skipped Jake's expensive birthday dinner, they assumed it was because I couldn't afford it. When I declined their offer to pay for my health insurance, they thought it was pride preventing me from accepting help. They had no idea that I was choosing to live modestly while building a business that was already generating more monthly income than my old corporate salary. They couldn't see that every sacrifice was strategic. Every frugal decision was an investment in my future independence. But that was exactly how I wanted it. Let them worry. Let them assume. Let them prepare their "I told you so" speeches for. When my consulting venture inevitably failed, because when the truth finally came out, their shock was going to be absolutely worth the wait. The email arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was revising a proposal for a local restaurant chain. The subject line reads Strategic Consulting Opportunity, Meridian Industries. And the sender was someone I'd never heard of, Rebecca Walsh, VP of Operations. Meridian Industries was a Fortune 500 manufacturing company with facilities across 3 states. They produced specialized components for the automotive industry, employed over 2,000 people, and generated annual revenues in the hundreds of millions. They were exactly the kind of client I never imagined working with. Too big, too established, too far outside my league of small businesses and startups. Rebecca's email was brief, but intriguing. We've heard excellent things about your operational efficiency work through our supply chain partners. Would you be available for a preliminary consultation regarding some challenges we're facing at our regional facilities? My first instinct was that someone had made a mistake. How could a Fortune 500 company have heard of me? But as I traced the connection, it made sense. 3 of my small business clients were suppliers to larger companies in Meridian's network. Word had traveled up the supply chain about the consultant who'd helped their vendors become more reliable, more efficient, more profitable. The preliminary meeting was scheduled for the following week at Meridian's regional headquarters. I spent 3 days researching everything I could about the company, their industry, their competitive landscape, and their recent financial performance. This wasn't a bakery struggling with inventory or a startup needing workflow systems. This was a complex organization with sophisticated problems that required sophisticated solutions. Rebecca Walsh turned out to be a sharp woman in her 40s, who'd risen through the ranks from floor supervisor to executive leadership. She walked me through Meridian's current challenges with the kind of directness I'd learned to appreciate in successful business leaders. Our problem is simple to describe, but complex to solve, she began, spreading financial reports across the conference table. 3 of our regional facilities are underperforming significantly compared to our benchmark locations. Same equipment, same training protocols, same management structure, but productivity is down 20% and quality metrics are concerning. She showed me charts comparing the facilities, all the data that suggested the underperforming locations should be succeeding but weren't. 2 consulting firms had already analyzed the situation. One had recommended a complete technological overhaul costing $12 million. The other had suggested replacing the entire management teams at all 3 facilities. Both solutions feel like overkill, Rebecca continued. Before we spend millions or fire dozens of people, we want to understand what's really happening on the ground. Your reputation suggests you might see something others have missed. The scope of the project was enormous, a 6-month engagement, involving site visits to all 3 facilities, comprehensive operational analysis, stakeholder interviews, and the development of implementation strategies for whatever solutions I recommended. The fee structure Rebecca proposed was unlike anything I'd ever encountered, a base consulting fee of $50,000, plus performance bonuses tied to measurable improvements in productivity and quality metrics if I succeeded in bringing the underperforming facilities up to company standards. The total compensation could exceed $120,000, more than twice what I'd made in my best year at Pinnacle Marketing, more than my father had ever earned in a single year throughout his entire career. I accepted the project that afternoon, then spent the evening in a state of shock at the magnitude of what I'd just committed to. This wasn't helping a small business owner fix their inventory system. This was analyzing complex industrial operations, managing stakeholder relationships across multiple states, and developing strategies that would affect thousands of employees and millions of dollars in revenue. The first facility visit was humbling. Walking through the massive production floor, watching hundreds of workers operating sophisticated machinery, I felt overwhelmed by the complexity of the operation. How could someone who'd been an independent consultant for less than a year, possibly identify solutions that previous consultants had missed? But as I spent more time observing and talking to employees, patterns began to emerge. The underperforming facilities weren't failing because of equipment or management, they were failing because of communication. Critical information about production schedules, quality standards, and process improvements wasn't flowing effectively between shifts, departments, and locations. The successful facilities had developed informal networks that compensated for gaps in the formal communication systems. Supervisors who stayed late to brief their counterparts on the next shift. Floor workers who'd created their own quality checkpoints beyond the official protocols. Maintenance teams that proactively addressed equipment issues before they became production problems. The underperforming facilities had the same formal systems but lacked these informal networks. They were following all the official protocols, but missing the collaborative relationships that made everything work smoothly. Over the next 4 months, I developed and implemented communication strategies that seemed almost embarrassingly simple compared to the technological overhauls and management restructuring that other consultants had recommended. Regular cross-shift briefings, standardized information sharing protocols, feedback systems that allowed floor workers to contribute to process improvements, recognition programs that incentivized collaborative problem solving. The results were dramatic and immediate. Within 8 weeks, productivity at all 3 facilities had improved by an average of 18%. Quality metrics exceeded company standards for the first time in 2 years. Employee satisfaction scores increased significantly and turnover rates dropped to the lowest levels in the facility's history. Rebecca Walsh called me into her office on a Friday afternoon in month 5 of the engagement. "Sarah," she said, pulling up the latest performance reports on her computer, "I need you to see these numbers." The data was remarkable. Not only had the 3 facilities reached benchmark performance levels, but they were now outperforming many of Meridian's supposedly successful locations. The solutions I'd implemented were being adopted across the entire company network. "We want to offer you a permanent position," Rebecca continued. "Director of Operational Excellence, 6-figure, salary, full benefits, equity participation. You'd oversee efficiency improvements across all our facilities." It was everything my family had wanted for me: security, prestige, a clear career path with a respected company. A year earlier, I would have accepted immediately. But sitting in that corporate conference room, I realized something profound had changed. The thrill wasn't in being offered a corporate position, it was in knowing that I'd solved a problem others couldn't solve. Using my own methods, building on my own reputation, succeeding entirely on my own terms. "I'm honored by the offer," I told Rebecca, "but I think I can be more valuable to Meridian as an external consultant. And there are other companies out there with similar challenges who could benefit from these approaches." I walked out of that meeting knowing that everything had changed. I was no longer the struggling entrepreneur my family worried about. I was someone who could command respect from Fortune 500 executives, solve complex organizational problems, and choose my own path. Forward. The question now was when to tell my family that their biggest fear, my failure, was never going to come true. The bank statement that arrived in November showed a balance I had to read 3 times to believe. $127,543.82. For the first time in my life, I had more money in my account than my father had ever made in a single year. The Meridian project had been completed successfully. The performance bonuses had been paid, and new clients were already reaching out based on word-of-mouth referrals from Rebecca Walsh's network. I sat in my modest apartment, surrounded by the same secondhand furniture and generic groceries I'd been living with for over a year, holding proof that everything had changed. But nobody knew. My family continued to treat me like their struggling relative who'd made a poor career choice and was too proud to admit it. The secrecy had become a peculiar burden. Every family gathering required me to perform a version of myself that no longer existed: the uncertain entrepreneur barely scraping by, probably regretting her decision to leave corporate security. I'd become skilled at deflecting questions about my finances and downplaying my success in ways that confirmed their assumptions. "How are things going with the consulting?" Mom would ask with that particular tone of concerned optimism, and I'd respond with carefully neutral updates: staying busy, working on a few interesting projects, never mentioning that those interesting projects were now generating monthly income that exceeded what most people made in a year. The contrast between my public and private reality had become surreal. At client meetings, I commanded respect from executives who managed multi-million-dollar budgets and made decisions affecting thousands of employees. At family dinners, I was still the daughter who needed gentle guidance about making practical choices. The Meridian Success had opened. Doors I hadn't known existed. Rebecca Walsh had introduced me to her network of industry executives, and my calendar was booked solid with consulting engagements through the following spring. Companies were reaching out directly, offering retainer agreements and long-term partnerships that promised steady six-figure income. I had moved beyond solving small business problems to architecting enterprise-level solutions. A regional hospital system hired me to optimize their supply chain operations. A logistics company brought me in to redesign their distribution network. A technology firm wanted my help scaling their operations for rapid growth. Each project built on the last, creating a reputation that spread through professional circles I'd never imagined accessing. I was being invited to speak at industry conferences, quoted in trade publications, and consulted by executives who'd never heard of my family's concerns about job security. The financial freedom was intoxicating in ways I hadn't anticipated. For the first time in my adult life, I could make decisions without calculating their cost. I could invest in better equipment, take courses that interested me rather than just those I could afford, and save for the future without anxiety about next month's rent. But perhaps more valuable than the money was the validation. Every successful project confirmed that I'd been right to trust my instincts, right to leave the safety of corporate employment, right to believe that I could build something meaningful on my own terms. The irony wasn't lost on me that my family's doubt had become my greatest motivator. Every dismissive comment, every suggestion that I returned to real work, every concerned conversation about my financial stability had fueled my determination to prove them wrong. Their low expectations had become the foundation for exceeding every goal I'd set for myself. Still, carrying the secret was becoming emotionally exhausting. When Jake talked about his latest bonus or promotion, I had to bite my tongue to avoid mentioning that my quarterly earnings now exceeded his annual salary. When my parents worried about my retirement savings, I couldn't tell them that I was already contributing more to my 401k than they'd ever been able to save. The hardest moments came when they offered to help. Dad's attempt to pay for my health insurance. Mom's suggestion that I move back home to save money. Jake's offer to introduce me to recruiters at his firm. Their generosity was genuine, born from love and concern, but accepting their help would mean admitting that I needed it. Instead, I developed elaborate stories to explain my declining their offers. One preferred my current health plan. I valued my independence too much to move back home. I wasn't ready to return to corporate work yet. Each deflection required me to perform financial uncertainty I no longer felt. The performance was becoming harder to maintain as my success became more visible to people outside my family. Industry publications had started featuring my work. Clients were posting about our collaborations on LinkedIn. Conference organizers were reaching out about speaking opportunities that came with substantial fees. I'd created separate social media profiles for my professional life, carefully curated to avoid overlap with my personal accounts or family members might see evidence of my growing reputation. The compartmentalization felt necessary but increasingly artificial. Late at night, alone in my apartment, I'd sometimes pull out my bank statements and client testimonials, reminding myself that this success was real, that I built something substantial, that my family's concerns had been unfounded. But the validation felt incomplete without being able to share it with the people who'd raised me, who'd shaped my work ethic, who deserved to know that their daughter had exceeded every expectation they never dared to have. The weight of the secret was becoming unbearable, but I wasn't ready to reveal it yet. There was something powerful about succeeding in silence, about building a reputation based purely on results, rather than family connections or inherited advantages. When the truth finally came out, I wanted it to be undeniable, overwhelming, impossible to dismiss as luck or timing. I wanted my success to speak so loudly that no one could ever again question my judgment, my capabilities, or my right to choose my own path forward. The phone call came on a Thursday evening while I was reviewing proposals for 2 new consulting engagements. Mom's voice was tight with worry, the kind of controlled panic she used when trying not to alarm us about serious problems. Jake lost his job today, she said without preamble. The whole department was eliminated. Budget cuts. He's devastated. I set down my laptop, processing this information that seemed to shift the fundamental dynamics of our family. Jake, the golden child who'd never failed at anything, who'd been held up as the example of smart career choices, who'd spent the last year subtly suggesting that my consulting venture was unsustainable. Is he okay? I asked, though I was thinking about the irony of timing. Just that morning, I'd signed a contract for a 6-month engagement that would pay me more than Jake's annual salary. He's trying to put on a brave face, but he's scared, Mom continued. The severance package is decent, but you know how expensive his lifestyle is. The mortgage, the car payments, Emma's engagement ring, he's been living paycheck to paycheck despite that good salary. The termination letter, when Jake showed it to the family the following Sunday, was a stark corporate document that reduced 3 years of his professional life to a single paragraph about organizational restructuring and economic necessity. Watching him read it aloud, his usual confidence replaced by barely concealed fear. I felt a complex mix of sympathy and vindication. The family dinner that night was surreal. For the first time in my adult life, I wasn't the one being counseled about career uncertainty. Instead, Jake sat in the hot seat while our parents offered the same advice they'd been giving me for over a year. Network aggressively. Consider taking any reasonable opportunity. Don't be too proud to accept help. Maybe this is a chance to reassess, Dad suggested gently. Sometimes these setbacks open doors to better opportunities. It was almost word for word what he'd said to me during my first months of consulting, except now he was saying it to the son who'd been living proof that traditional career paths offered security and predictability. Jake's job search became the family's primary concern. Mom forwarded him job listings daily. Dad reached out to his professional contacts. Family conversations revolved around interview strategies and salary negotiations. The attention that had been focused on my questionable life choices shifted entirely to Jake's crisis. The most telling moment came when Jake asked if he could borrow money to cover his mortgage while he searched for new employment. The son who'd been preaching financial responsibility to his entrepreneurial sister was asking for loans to maintain the lifestyle that his secure corporate job had supported. Of course, honey, Mom said immediately. We'll help however we can. But I could see the strain in my parents' faces. They were approaching retirement, living on fixed incomes, and now they were being asked to support their adult son's expenses while he figured out his next move. The financial pressure was exactly what they'd always feared I would create with my risky career choice. Sarah, Dad said after Jake left that evening, I know we've been hard on you about the consulting thing, but looking at Jake's situation, maybe there's something to be said for being your own boss. At least no one can fire you from your own business. It was the closest he'd come to acknowledging that my path might have merit. But the validation felt hollow, coming only after their preferred model had failed so spectacularly. The weeks that followed revealed just how fragile Jake's apparent success had been. His lifestyle had been entirely dependent on regular paychecks from an employer who'd eliminated his position without warning. His emergency savings were minimal. His network, while impressive, consisted mostly of colleagues in the same industry, facing similar cutbacks. Meanwhile, my business continued to thrive. While Jake attended networking events desperate for any opportunity, I was turning down projects because my schedule was already full. While he worried about making mortgage payments, I was considering whether to invest in a larger office space to accommodate my growing client base. The contrast was stark and undeniable, but I still kept my success private. Revealing it now would feel like kicking Jake while he was down, taking advantage of his vulnerability to prove a point about career choices. My family was dealing with enough stress without adding the shock of learning that their struggling daughter was actually more financially secure than their golden child had ever been, but the irony was delicious in its completeness. The family member they'd been worried about was thriving, while the one they'd held up as an example of smart planning was scrambling to avoid financial catastrophe. The stupid career change was generating stable income, while the secure corporate position had evaporated overnight. As I watched Jake struggle with unemployment, I felt a mixture of empathy for his situation and satisfaction that my own choices had been vindicated. But more than anything, I felt grateful that I'd chosen independence over security, that I'd built something that belonged entirely to me, something that no corporate restructuring could take away. The golden child had fallen, and it was becoming increasingly clear that the family disappointment might actually be the success story no one had seen coming. The tax documents spread across my dining table told an undeniable story. Gross income of $284,000 for the year, with net profits exceeding $190,000 after business expenses. My accountant had called it an exceptional year for a first-time entrepreneur, but I knew it was just the beginning. The contracts already signed for the following year promised even higher earnings. As I organized the paperwork from my accountant, I couldn't help but think about the conversations that would happen if my family ever saw these numbers. Dad's highest earning year in his entire career had been $89,000, back when he'd received a one-time bonus for managing a particularly complex project. My net income was more than double his best year, and I was just getting started. The success had accelerated beyond my most optimistic projections. What had started as small business consulting had evolved into organizational strategy work for mid-sized companies and enterprises. My reputation for solving complex operational problems had spread through professional networks, creating a pipeline of clients willing to pay premium rates for proven results. The hospital system project had been particularly transformative. Their supply chain inefficiencies were costing them millions annually, and previous consultants had suggested technology solutions that would take years to implement. Instead, I'd identified communication breakdowns between departments and implemented coordination protocols that reduced waste by 35% within 3 months. The savings in the first quarter alone exceeded my entire consulting fee. Word of that success had reached other healthcare organizations, and I was now being retained by a regional network of hospitals to replicate the improvements across multiple facilities. The contract was worth $150,000 over 6 months, more than Jake had made in his best year at the investment firm. But the financial success was only part of the story. I'd been invited to speak at the National Operations Excellence Conference, where my presentation on communication-based efficiency solutions had drawn standing ovations and generated dozens of new client inquiries. Industry publications were featuring my case studies. Business schools were requesting permission to use my methodologies in their curriculum. The professional recognition was everything I dreamed of during those suffocating years at Pinnacle Marketing. I was being consulted by executives who managed billion-dollar operations. My strategies were being implemented by companies that employed thousands of people. The impact of my work was measurable, meaningful, and growing, yet my family remained completely unaware of this transformation. To them, I was still the daughter who'd made a questionable career choice and was probably struggling financially. Their concern had evolved from active criticism to gentle worry, but their fundamental assumption that I was failing hadn't changed. The weight of maintaining this fiction was becoming enormous. When Jake mentioned being stressed about his job search expenses, I wanted to offer to pay them. When my parents talked about postponing vacation plans due to budget concerns, I could have easily funded their trip. When Mom worried about unexpected car repair costs, I had to bite my tongue to avoid solving her problem with a simple, checked out. My lifestyle hadn't changed much despite the income increase. I was still living in the same modest apartment, still shopping at discount grocery stores, still driving the used Honda I'd bought 3 years earlier. The frugality had become habitual, and I was reinvesting most of my earnings into business, development, and long-term savings. But the evidence of my success was becoming harder to hide. My phone rang constantly with client calls and new opportunities. FedEx packages arrived regularly with contracts and project documents. I had to set up a separate business line because personal calls were being overwhelmed by professional inquiries. The most challenging moment came when a local business Journal featured me in their 40 under 40 list of successful young professionals. The article described my rapid rise from corporate employee to sought-after consultant, mentioned several high-profile clients, and estimated my business's annual revenue in the six-figure range. When Jake saw the article during his job research, he called me immediately. "Sarah, did you see this? There's someone with your exact name who runs a consulting business. What are the odds?" I laughed it off, suggesting it must be a different Sarah Mitchell, but my heart was pounding. The secret was becoming harder to maintain as my professional profile grew more visible. That evening, staring at the tax documents that proved beyond doubt that I'd succeeded far beyond anyone's expectations, I realized the time for revelation was approaching. My family's financial stress was real, Jake's unemployment was dragging on longer than expected, and my parents were making sacrifices to help him that I could easily eliminate. More importantly, I was tired of hiding. Tired of performing struggle. I no longer felt tired of accepting their concern when I should be receiving their pride. Tired of letting them worry about a daughter who was actually more successful than they'd ever dared to dream. The question wasn't whether to tell them anymore. It was how to tell them in a way that would help rather than hurt. That would heal rather than divide. That would prove my point without crushing their spirits. The perfect opportunity was coming soon. Jake's financial pressure was mounting. My parents' retirement security was being threatened by their attempts to help him, and the family was heading toward a crisis that I could solve with a simple revelation. But when I finally told them the truth, I wanted to do more than shock them with numbers. I wanted to show them that the daughter they'd underestimated had become someone who could take care of the whole family. The voicemail from Mom arrived at 7:42 p.m. on a Tuesday, her voice shakier than I'd ever heard it. "Sarah, honey, can you call me back? We need to have a family meeting this weekend. There's been a situation with the investments, and we need to figure out what to do." When I called back an hour later, the full scope of the crisis became clear. Jake, during his final months at the investment firm, had convinced our parents to let him manage a portion of their retirement savings. He'd promised better returns than their conservative portfolio was generating, assuring them that his professional expertise would secure their financial future. He was so confident, Dad said, his voice heavy with regret. Said he could get us 12% returns instead of the 6% we were making. We trusted him. He's our son, and he works in finance. Worked in finance. The past tense hit hard. The investment strategy had been aggressive, focusing on tech stocks and cryptocurrency that Jake believed were sure things. When the market turned, the losses had been swift and devastating. 60% of their retirement savings and money they'd spent 30 years accumulating had evaporated in less than 6 months. "We didn't want to tell you while you were dealing with your own career struggles," Mom added, her voice breaking slightly. "But with Jake out of work and our savings gone, we don't know what to do." The irony was breathtaking. While they'd been worrying about my financial stability, their own foundation had been crumbling under the guidance of the son they'd trusted implicitly. Jake's smart financial decisions had destroyed the security they'd worked their entire lives to build. Jake's voice joined the call, and I could hear the devastation in his tone. "Sarah, I'm so sorry. I thought I knew what I was doing. I thought I could help them retire comfortably. Instead, I've ruined everything." The family meeting was scheduled for a Saturday afternoon at my parents' house. As I drove over, I carried with me a folder containing bank statements, tax documents, client contracts, and a business plan that outlined my projected earnings for the next 3 years. Today would be the day the truth finally came out. But first, I had to listen to the full extent of their crisis. Mom had prepared a spreadsheet showing their current financial situation, and the numbers were grim. Between the investment losses and the money they'd been lending Jake for his mortgage payments, they're available. Savings had dropped to less than $15,000. Dad's pension would cover basic living expenses, but any major unexpected costs, medical bills, home repairs, long-term care, could force them into bankruptcy. "I've been looking at part-time jobs," Dad said, his pride clearly wounded. "At 68, I thought I was done working, but maybe I can find something to supplement the pension." Jake's situation was equally dire. His unemployment benefits would run out in 3 weeks, and his job search wasn't yielding results. The investment firm debacle had damaged his professional reputation, making it harder to find new positions. He was facing the possibility of losing his house, defaulting on his loans, and moving back in with our parents. "I've destroyed everything," he said, staring at his hands. "My career, my finances, their retirement. I was supposed to be the responsible one, the one who made smart choices." The weight of their collective despair was overwhelming. These were the people who'd raised me, who'd sacrificed for my education, who'd always put family first. Seeing them broken by financial decisions, made by the son they trusted most, was heartbreaking. But it was also the perfect moment for revelation. "I need to tell you something," I said, pulling out my folder. Something I should have shared months ago. The business portfolio I laid out on their dining table told the story they'd never heard. Client testimonials from Fortune 500 companies, speaking engagement invitations from industry conferences, tax documents showing income that exceeded anything anyone in our family had ever earned. "Sarah," Mom whispered, staring at a bank statement. "What is this?" "This is my consulting business," I said simply. "This is what you've been calling my stupid career change." The silence that followed was profound. Dad picked up one of my client contracts, reading through the scope of work and compensation with growing amazement. Jake stared at my tax returns, his mouth slightly open. "You made almost $300,000 last year?" Jake asked, his voice barely audible. "Last year was just the beginning," I replied, pulling out my projected earnings for the current year. "I'm on track to clear $500,000 this year with contracts already signed through next spring." Mom was crying now, but they were tears of relief mixed with shock. "Why didn't you tell us?" "We've been so worried about you." "Because I wanted to prove that I could do it," I said. "I wanted to show you that sometimes the stupidest decision is actually the smartest one you'll ever make." Dad was shaking his head slowly, a smile beginning to form despite his tears. "You've been letting us worry about you while you were making more money than I ever dreamed of earning. And while I was lecturing you about financial responsibility," Jake added, his voice thick with irony and shame, "I reached into my purse and pulled out a check I'd written that morning. This is for $50,000, I said, placing it in front of my parents. "It's enough to stabilize your immediate situation while we figure out a long-term plan for rebuilding your retirement savings." The check sat on the table like a small miracle, proof that the family's financial crisis could be solved by the daughter they'd been trying to save from herself. "I can't believe this," Mom said, holding the check with trembling hands. "Our Sarah, the successful businesswoman." "Your Sarah," I corrected gently, "who learned everything about hard work and determination from watching you two build a life together." The storm that had been building for months, Jake's unemployment, the investment losses, the mounting financial pressure had finally broken. But instead of destroying the family, it had created the opportunity for truth, reconciliation, and a complete reversal of everything they believed about success and security. For the first time in over a year, we were all seeing clearly. The business portfolio I'd assembled over 18 months wasn't just a collection of documents. It was evidence of a transformation that none of us had seen coming. As I spread the materials across my parents' dining table, each piece told part of a story that contradicted everything my family believed about my life. The client list read like a who's who of regional business success: Meridian Industries, Regional Medical Center Network, TechFlow Solutions, 3 hospital systems, 2 manufacturing companies, and a dozen smaller businesses that had become profitable success stories under my guidance. Conservative estimates valued my consulting practice at over $400,000 annually, with growth projections that suggested I'd cross the $1 million threshold within 3 years. "Sarah," Dad said, examining a letter of recommendation from Rebecca, Walsh at Meridian, "this executive is calling you one of the most insightful strategic consultants she's ever worked with. This is a Fortune 500 company. That project saved them over $2 million in efficiency improvements," I explained. "They've recommended me to 6 other companies in their network." Mom was studying my speaking engagement contracts with wonder. The National Operations Excellence Conference, They're paying you $15,000 just to give a presentation, plus travel expenses and accommodation at a 5-star hotel, I added. That presentation led to 12 new client inquiries, including 3 that turned into 6-figure engagements. Jake was quiet, absorbing the magnitude of what he was seeing. Finally, he looked up from my tax returns and said, "You're making more than our entire department made combined. More than my boss made. More than I ever thought possible, outside of investment banking or tech startups." The weight of my success was settling over them like a revelation that required complete recalibration of everything they'd assumed about risk, security, and smart career choices. The daughter they'd been worried about had become more successful than any of them had ever been. But beyond the financial numbers was evidence of impact that went far deeper than money. I showed them testimonials from business owners whose companies I'd saved from bankruptcy, whose employees I'd helped keep their jobs, whose dreams I'd helped preserve through strategic guidance and operational improvements. "This letter," I said, pointing to a handwritten note from Maria Santos at Sweet Dreams Bakery, "is from my first client. She says my advice helped her avoid closing the business her grandmother started. She's been able to hire 3 new employees and expand to a 2nd location." Dad read the letter aloud, his voice growing stronger with each sentence. When he finished, he looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, not just pride, but respect. "You're not just making money," he said slowly. "You're changing people's lives." The portfolio also included my future plans, carefully researched and methodically planned. I was considering expanding into executive coaching, developing online courses for entrepreneurs, potentially franchising my methodology to other consultants. The business model was scalable, sustainable, and completely under my control. "No one can fire me," I said, echoing Dad's earlier comment about entrepreneurship. "No corporate restructuring can eliminate my position. No budget cuts can make my job disappear. I built this, and I own it completely." The irony wasn't lost on anyone. While Jake's secure corporate position had vanished overnight, my risky consulting venture had become the most stable income source in the family. The career choice they called stupid had proven to be the smartest decision I'd ever made. "I should have trusted you," Mom said, tears streaming down her face. "I should have supported your dream instead of trying to talk you out of it." "You were trying to protect me," I replied. "You wanted me to be safe and secure. But what you didn't understand is that the real security comes from building something that can't be taken away." Jake was struggling with his own revelation. "I've been such an ass," he said quietly. "All those times I lectured you about financial responsibility, about making smart choices, about growing up and being practical. And the whole time, you were building something incredible." The business plan I shared next outlined my vision for the coming years. Within 5 years, I projected building a consulting firm with multiple associates, handling enterprise-level contracts worth millions of dollars, potentially going national with my operational efficiency methodologies. The trajectory was clear. I wasn't just successful. I was positioned to become extraordinarily successful. "Sarah," Dad said, setting down the last document, "I owe you an apology. We all do. You saw something we couldn't see. You had faith in yourself when we didn't. You were right, and we were wrong." The moment felt like vindication, but not the bitter kind I'd sometimes imagined. Instead, it was sweet with the possibility of understanding, of family bonds rebuilt on a foundation of mutual respect rather than protective concern. "I don't need apologies," I said. "I needed to prove to myself that I could do this." Your doubt actually helped and made me more determined, more focused, more committed to succeeding. But even as I said it, I knew there was truth in Dad's words. They did owe me an apology, not for caring about my well-being, but for assuming that their limited vision of success was the only valid path forward. "What happens now?" Mom asked. "What do you need from us?" It was the question I'd been waiting for. Not what they could do to fix my problems or guide my choices, but how they could support the success I'd already achieved. "I need you to trust." I said simply, "and I need you to let me help this family the way you've always helped me." The moment of truth had arrived, and with it, the opportunity to rewrite our family's story entirely. The check for $50,000 sat on the dining table between us, like a bridge between two different versions of our family. The one where I was the struggling daughter who needed protection, and the one where I was the successful businesswoman who could provide it. "I can't accept this," Dad said, though his hand trembled as he touched the corner of the check. "You shouldn't have to take care of us. We're supposed to take care of you." "Dad," I said gently, "what if taking care of each other isn't about hierarchy or age or who's supposed to do what? What if it's just about family members helping when they can?" The transformation in the room was palpable. Mom kept looking between my bank statements and my face, as if trying to reconcile the daughter she'd been worrying about with the woman, who'd apparently been thriving beyond their wildest expectations. Jake sat in stunned silence, processing the complete reversal of everything he believed about success and failure. "Tell us everything," Mom said finally. "From the beginning. Help us understand how we got this so wrong." So I did. I walked them through the entire journey, the suffocating years at Pinnacle Marketing, the months of secret planning in my notebook, the terrifying first weeks of uncertainty, the gradual building of confidence and clientele. I explained how their criticism had actually motivated me, how their low expectations had freed me from the pressure to succeed on their timeline. "Every time you suggested I go back to corporate work," I said, "it reminded me why I'd left in the first place." Every family dinner where Jake's achievements were celebrated while my progress was dismissed made me more determined to prove that there were different ways to measure success. The most difficult part was explaining why I kept my success secret for so long. How could I make them understand that I needed to succeed entirely on my own terms before sharing it with people whose approval had once meant everything to me? I needed to know that my confidence wasn't dependent on your validation. I explained. For my whole life, I'd made decisions based on what you thought was best. With the consulting business, I needed to prove to myself first, then to you that I could trust my own judgment. Jake finally spoke up, his voice heavy with both admiration and regret. "Sarah, I've been thinking about this wrong for months. When I lost my job, I felt like such a failure because I'd been telling you that corporate employment was the safe choice. But you were building something that no economic downturn, no corporate restructuring, no budget cuts could touch. Your job loss wasn't a personal failure," I assured him. "It was a systemic problem with putting all your security in someone else's hands. You're talented, you're smart, you just bet on the wrong model." The check remained untouched as we talked, but its presence changed everything about our conversation. For the first time in my adult life, I was the family member with resources, with stability, with the power to solve problems rather than create them. "This is enough to stabilize your immediate situation," I said, pointing to the check. "But I want to do more than just give you money. I want to help you rebuild in a way that gives you real security." I'd spent the week before this meeting developing a comprehensive plan for my family's financial recovery. Dad's pension could be supplemented by consulting work. His decades of project management experience were valuable to small businesses that couldn't afford full-time managers. Mom's organizational skills and attention to detail would be perfect for helping other small business owners with administrative challenges. "You could both work with me," I suggested. "Not as employees, but as partners. Help me expand the business while building your own income streams." For Jake, I had a different proposal. His finance background and professional network, despite recent setbacks, were still valuable assets. He could specialize in helping small businesses with financial planning and investment strategies, the very services that I often needed to recommend to clients but couldn't provide myself. "We could be a family business," I said. "Each of us bringing our own expertise, all of us benefiting from the success." The idea hung in the air like a possibility none of us had ever considered. Not just financial recovery, but transformation evolution from a family where one person's success was held up as a model for others to follow, to a family where everyone's strengths contributed to collective prosperity. "You really want us to work with you?" Mom asked, wonder in her voice. "I want us to work together," I corrected. I've proven I can succeed alone. Now I want to see what we can accomplish as a team." Dad picked up the check, studied it for a long moment, then looked at me with tears in his eyes. "Sarah, 18 months ago, I told you that this career change was the stupidest thing you'd ever done." "You did," I agreed, smiling. "I've never been happier to be wrong about anything in my entire life." Jake laughed, the first genuine laughter I'd heard from him in months. "So the family screw-up turns out to be the family success story. The sister we were trying to save ends up saving all of us." "Nobody's saving anybody," I said firmly. "We're just finally seeing each other clearly." Mom stood up and hugged me with the kind of fierce pride I'd been craving for over a year. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "Not just for the money, but for having the courage to follow your own path when none of us could see where it was." Leading, the great revelation was complete. The family that had started the day worried about financial catastrophe was ending it with hope, possibility, and a completely new understanding of what success could look like. The daughter they tried to protect had become their protector. The career choice they called stupid had proven to be brilliant. But more than that, we'd discovered something none of us had expected. That success shared with people you love is infinitely more satisfying than success achieved in isolation. The check was just money. The real treasure was the family we were about to become. The handwritten letter arrived 3 days after our family meeting, delivered by Dad himself rather than mailed. His familiar script covered 2 pages of his best stationery, and the words carried the weight of 18 months of misunderstanding. Finally being set right. "My dear Sarah," it began. "I've started this letter a dozen times, trying to find words adequate for what I need to say to you. As your father, I failed you in the most fundamental way possible. I didn't trust your judgment when it mattered most." Reading his careful script, I could picture him at the kitchen table where he taught me to do homework, wrestling with how to acknowledge that his protective instincts had become limiting beliefs. When he told us you were leaving Pinnacle to start your own business, my first thought wasn't, how can I support my daughter's dreams? It was, how can I talk her out of this mistake? I was so focused on protecting you from what I saw as inevitable failure that I couldn't see the strength and vision that would make your success inevitable. The letter continued for 2 pages, each paragraph a careful acknowledgement of specific moments when he chose in concern over confidence in my abilities. He remembered conversations I'd forgotten, times when his gentle suggestions to be practical had been received as votes of no confidence in my capabilities. The most painful realization is that you succeeded not because of our support, but in spite of our doubt. You had to prove yourself twice, once to the business world and once to your own family. That's an unfair burden, and I'm sorry we placed it on you. But the most moving section came near the end. Yesterday, I told my golf buddies about my daughter's consulting business. I shared your client list, your speaking engagements, your projected earnings. I bragged about your success with the same pride I've always felt about Jake's achievements, but this time it felt different. This time, I was celebrating someone who'd earned success the hard way, who'd built something from nothing, who'd proven that courage and vision matter more than safety and convention. I've worked for 43 years in the same industry, for the same company, following the same playbook that my father taught me. I saved money, avoided risks, played it safe, and built a decent life. But you, Sarah, you built something extraordinary. In 18 months, you've achieved more than I accomplished in my entire career. More importantly, you've made a difference in the lives of dozens of business owners and thousands of their employees. The final paragraph brought tears to my eyes. I want you to know that when people ask me about my children, I now lead with your story. Not because your success is more valuable than Jake's character or potential, but because your journey represents something I wish I'd had the courage to attempt when I was your age. You didn't just build a business, you built a legacy of independence and impact that will influence how our family thinks about success for generations. He'd signed it simply, with love, respect, and profound admiration, Dad. The letter represented more than an apology, it was a complete revision of our relationship dynamic. For my entire adult life, our conversations had carried an undercurrent of parental guidance, even when I disagreed with the direction they were steering me. Now, for the first time, Dad was addressing me as an equal, acknowledging that I'd surpassed his own achievements and earned the right to make my own decisions without qualification or caveat. Mom's single quotes S response had been different but equally meaningful. Rather than writing a letter, she'd spent the week telling everyone she encountered about my success. The postal worker, her book club friends, the pharmacist at CVS, anyone within earshot heard about her daughter's consulting business and its remarkable growth. I'm making up for lost time, she explained when I teased her about her sudden shift from worried concern to active promotion. For 18 months, I've been apologizing to people for your career situation. Now I'm setting the record straight. Jake's reconciliation was perhaps the most complex because it involved not just acknowledging my success, but processing his own failure. The brother who'd spent years being held up as the model of smart career choices was now unemployed while his supposedly impractical sister was thriving. I've been thinking about risk differently, he said during a lunch meeting where we discussed his potential role in my expanding business. I thought corporate employment was safe because it came with predictable paychecks and benefits. But you were right, the real risk was putting all my security in someone else's hands. His humility was genuine and complete. There were no hedges, no attempts to minimize my success or explain away his setbacks. He'd simply accepted that his assumptions about career strategy had been wrong and mine had been right. I want to work with you, he said, but only if you think I can actually contribute. I don't want charity, even from my sister. The role one offered him was substantial and well suited to his skills. Heading up the financial strategy consulting arm of my business, working with clients who needed help with budgeting, investment planning, and financial management. His experience, even including the setbacks, had given him insights into both the opportunities and pitfalls of financial decision-making. You made mistakes, I told him, but you also learned from them. That makes you more valuable, not less. Clients will trust someone who's experienced failure and recovery more than someone who's never been tested. The transformation in our family dynamics was remarkable. Sunday dinners that had once felt like performance reviews now became strategy. Sessions where we discussed business challenges, shared client success stories, and planned for collective growth. The family group chat that had once been filled with job listings and concern suggestions now buzzed with professional referrals and collaborative opportunities. Most importantly, the fundamental respect that had been missing from our relationships was finally present. My parents no longer spoke to me with the gentle condescension reserved for adult children who needed guidance. Jake no longer offered advice from a position of assumed superiority. Instead, we were communicating as professionals, as equals, as people who recognized and valued each other's expertise. The reconciliation was complete. But more than that, we'd evolved into a family where success was measured not by conformity to traditional expectations, but by each person's ability to contribute their unique strengths to our collective prosperity and happiness. The incorporation documents for Mitchell & Associates Strategic Consulting arrived on a Tuesday morning, making official what had been evolving naturally over the past 6 months. What had started as Sarah Mitchell's solo consulting practice had grown into a family business where each of us contributed our unique expertise to an expanding portfolio of clients. The office space we leased in the downtown business district was a far cry from my studio apartment where this journey had begun. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city where I'd once worried about paying rent, and now we employed 4 full-time consultants plus administrative staff. The growth had been organic but rapid, driven by word-of-mouth referrals, and the reputation we built for delivering measurable results. Dad had discovered a passion for project management consulting that surprised all of us. His decades of experience managing complex construction projects translated perfectly to helping small businesses organize their operations, implement systems, and meet deadlines. At 70, he was working more energetically than he had in his final years before retirement, invigorated by clients who valued his expertise and paid premium rates for his guidance. I should have done this 20 years ago, he said, reviewing his client calendar during our Monday morning team meeting. I never realized how much knowledge I'd accumulated until I started sharing it with people who needed it. Mom had become our operations manager, bringing her natural organizational abilities to bear on the administrative challenges of a rapidly growing business. She'd implemented client management systems, streamlined our proposal process, and developed protocols that allowed us to handle triple the client load without sacrificing quality. Her attention to detail and genuine care for client relationships had become one of our competitive advantages. "Your mother always said she was just a homemaker," Dad mentioned one afternoon, watching her coordinate a complex multi-client project timeline. But running a household for 40 years is the best management training anyone could get. Jake had thrown himself into the financial consulting role with the zeal of someone determined to rebuild his professional reputation through excellence. His experience with investment losses, rather than being a liability, had become his greatest asset. Clients trusted him because he'd made mistakes and learned from them, because he understood the emotional weight of financial decisions, because he could speak to both the opportunities and risks of various strategies. "I'm a better financial advisor now than I ever was as an investment banker," he said, reviewing client feedback that consistently praised his practical, conservative approach. "Before I was selling products, now I'm solving problems." The family business model had proved more successful than any of us had anticipated. Clients appreciated working with a team that clearly cared about each other and brought complementary skills to every engagement. The trust and communication that existed between us translated into more effective collaboration, better problem solving, and higher client satisfaction. Our reputation in the regional business community had grown beyond what I'd ever imagined possible as a solo consultant. We were being invited to speak at conferences as a panel, featured in business publications as an example of successful family entrepreneurship, and consulted by other consulting firms interested in replicating our collaborative model. The financial success was substantial, but felt almost secondary to the satisfaction of working together toward shared goals. The business was generating enough revenue to provide comfortable incomes for all of us, while maintaining the growth trajectory that promised even greater success in the coming years. But perhaps the most significant change was in our family dynamics outside of work. The respect and equality that had developed through our professional collaboration had transformed our personal relationships as well. Sunday dinners were no longer exercises in subtle judgment or concerned guidance, but celebrations of shared achievements and collaborative planning for future opportunities. The conversations that had once revolved around my career situation now focused on industry trends, client challenges, and strategic planning for business growth. My parents no longer offered advice about my professional choices. Instead, they asked for my input on theirs. "Sarah," Mom said during one particularly satisfying team meeting, "I need your thoughts on the Henderson manufacturing proposal. They're asking for operational analysis, but I think there are financial management issues that Jake should address first." It was the kind of consultation that would have been unimaginable 2 years earlier, when my business acumen was questioned and my professional judgment was considered unreliable. The most rewarding aspect of our new normal was the impact we were having on other families and businesses. Parents saw our story and began supporting their adult children's entrepreneurial dreams instead of discouraging them. Siblings learned to collaborate professionally rather than compete personally. Business owners realized that family members could be valuable partners rather than just sources of conflict. We'd become an example of what was possible when people set aside their assumptions about success and security, when families chose to support each other's authentic strengths rather than trying to fit everyone into the same mold. The woman who had sat in her studio apartment 8 months earlier, holding a contract and wondering if her family would ever understand her choices, had evolved into someone who could provide not just financial security, but professional fulfillment for the people she loved most. But more importantly, we'd all learned that success isn't just about individual achievement. It's about creating opportunities for the people around you to discover and develop their own potential. The incorporation documents were just legal paperwork, but they represented something much more significant. A family that had learned to see each other clearly, to value each other's contributions, and to build something together that none of us could have achieved alone. The brochure for the Mitchell Family Entrepreneurship Initiative arrived from the printer on the 2nd anniversary of my resignation from Pinnacle Marketing. Glossy pages outlined a mentorship program designed to help young entrepreneurs navigate family doubt, build confidence in unconventional career paths, and develop businesses that could thrive despite skepticism from loved ones. The program had grown from conversations with clients, children who reminded me of myself 2 years earlier, intelligent, ambitious young people whose families were pushing them toward traditional career paths that felt suffocating. I'd started mentoring a few of them informally, sharing the strategies that had helped me succeed not just in business, but in transforming family relationships from sources of pressure into sources of support. You can't change your families. Mine by arguing with them. I told a group of 20-something entrepreneurs during our monthly meeting. You change their minds by succeeding so undeniably that their assumptions become impossible to maintain. The initiative had become one of my most personally satisfying projects. These young people faced the same challenges I'd encountered: well-meaning families who equated risk with irresponsibility, who confused unconventional choices with poor judgment, who believed that security could only be found in traditional employment, but they also had something I hadn't: a roadmap for navigating these challenges, proven strategies for building businesses while managing family expectations, and a mentor who understood that professional success and family harmony didn't have to be mutually exclusive. The stories they shared reminded me of my own journey. Emma, whose parents wanted her to become a teacher, but who'd built a thriving graphic design business. Marcus, whose family couldn't understand why he'd left law school to develop educational software. Sophia, whose immigrant parents saw her sustainable fashion startup as frivolous compared to the accounting career they'd envisioned for her. Each of them was learning what I'd discovered: that sometimes the greatest act of love toward your family is refusing to live the life they've planned for you, especially when you know you're capable of something more meaningful. And IMPACTFUL, the mentorship program had caught the attention of business, schools, and entrepreneurship organizations across the region. We were being asked to develop curriculum, speak at conferences, and share our methodology with other mentors working with young entrepreneurs. The demand suggested that family-related career conflict was far more common than anyone had realized. The real measure of success was in the transformation stories. Parents who'd initially opposed their children's entrepreneurial dreams were becoming their biggest advocates once the businesses started succeeding. Families were learning to see risk-taking as courage rather than recklessness, to value innovation over convention, to measure success by impact and fulfillment rather than just security and predictability. The hardest part isn't building the business, one of my mentees said during a recent session. It's maintaining faith in yourself when the people you love most doubt your judgment. I understood that challenge intimately. The program addressed it directly, helping young entrepreneurs develop internal validation systems that weren't dependent on external approval, teaching them to use family doubt as motivation rather than allowing it to become discouragement. Reflecting on my own journey, now I could see how each phase had been necessary. The years of playing it safe at Pinnacle had taught me what I didn't want. The months of family criticism had strengthened my resolve. The period of secret success had allowed me to build confidence independently. The revelation and reconciliation had created the foundation for our current collaboration. What I'd learned most profoundly was that success isn't just about achieving your own goals. It's about expanding the definition of what's possible for everyone around you. By proving that unconventional paths could lead to extraordinary outcomes, I'd given my family permission to reconsider their own assumptions about career, security, and success. Dad had discovered that retirement didn't have to mean withdrawal from meaningful work. Mom had realized that her organizational skills were valuable in professional context, not just domestic ones. Jake had learned that failure could be transformed into expertise, that setbacks could become competitive advantages. But perhaps the most important lesson was about the nature of family itself. We evolved from a group of people related by blood but limited by different visions of success, into a team of collaborators who valued each other's unique contributions and supported each other's individual growth. The young entrepreneurs in my mentorship program were learning these lessons earlier than I had, with guidance that I wished for during my own uncertain early months. They were building businesses and maintaining family relationships simultaneously. proving that you don't have to choose between professional fulfillment and personal connection. As I reviewed the applications for our next mentorship cohort, I was struck by the diversity of dreams represented: sustainable farming ventures, technology startups, creative agencies, social impact organizations. What united them wasn't their industry or business model, but their determination to build something meaningful despite family skepticism. Each application reminded me of myself 2 years earlier, sitting in my studio apartment with a contract in hand, wondering if I'd ever be able to bridge the gap between my family's expectations and my own ambitions. Now I knew that the bridge wasn't built through argument or explanation, but through demonstrable success that spoke louder than any words could. The brochure in my hands represented more than a mentorship program. It was evidence of a legacy that extended far beyond my own business success. Every young entrepreneur who learned to navigate family doubt while building meaningful ventures was proof that the courage to follow unconventional paths could be taught, learned, and passed forward. The family that I'd once called my career, change, the stupidest thing I'd ever done, was now helping other families support their children's entrepreneurial dreams. The daughter who'd been seen as a disappointment had become someone who helped other families recognize and celebrate their children's potential. That transformation from family worry to family pride, from individual struggle to collective success, from personal achievement to lasting impact felt like the most meaningful measure of success I could have imagined. The stupid decision had become the smartest thing I'd ever done, not just for me, but for everyone whose life it had touched.